Wages to freeze. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian.Heise here, and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. Grab your stein of coffee and let's have a look at this article from the Weekend Australian discussing, well, get ready for a big chill on wages. Yeah, well, we're in a recession, the first recession in 38 years, and wage growth, well, hasn't really been that spectacular, and the RBA's ability to predict it, well, let's not even bother anymore. They've failed since 2011. Maybe they're going to get it right in not predicting it. So even more Australian workers will have their pay cut or wages frozen as companies squeeze operating costs, leaving a trail of income stagnation and wasted capacity as the nation emerges from the COVID-19 recession. How are we even emerging from the recession? But apparently we are. I think we haven't even felt the actual impact of the recession. There's still too much propping up the economy, too much artificial support from the government, too many businesses that are dependent on JobKeeper to keep going. I mean, that's the sad reality of it. You know, they've done the damage, guys, and they're hoping the economy will miraculously spring back. But people's habits are going to have changed. Sure, you can give people out restaurant vouchers in New South Wales and you might get a little uptick, but how many people have gotten out of the habit of going out to eat, wasting money, or realize, damn, I've got a lot of extra savings in my bank account. Where was my money going? Oh, look, I pissed it away on this stuff. Not happening again. Or, well, here's another thing. How many people have they now got as first home buyers back into the housing market? You know, sure, you'll get the uptick on fridges and other things like that, but you know, those mortgage payments need to be made, everyone. According to the Reserve Bank Business Liaison Program, 30% of surveyed companies have to have a wage freeze in place, and a further 25% are reporting they will be implementing a pause in the coming year. The pandemic's big chill on earnings is expected to be deeper and longer, with many high-paid workers taking a pay cut, salary reviews suspended, and significant slack in the economy. The RBA says wage growth would be weak for years, with sub 2% pay deals the likely new norm, except for, well, certain industries that already have deals signed up. The last time 55% of firms were reporting wage freezes was in September 2009 in the wake of the GFC. A year ago, only 18% of companies were telling the central bank they had initiated a pay freeze or were planning one. Substantial spare capacity, including high... Wait, so the RBA gets all this information. Then why are they making these predictions wrong so often? Can someone explain that to me? I mean, 2009, oh, it's on the chart here. There you go. There's the fall. And then they thought it'll jump back in 2011 and shoot right back up. Maybe they don't quite appreciate the challenges of running a business. How many of them actually have? Substantial spare capacity, including high unemployment, is likely to keep wages growth and inflation low for a considerable period, the RBA said in its quarterly statement on monetary policy issued on Friday. The bank expects annual growth in the wage price index to slump to 1% by mid-2021 and remain below 2% over the next few years. So we're probably going to have wage growth below inflation. Many firms have responded to the effects of the pandemic, to the effects of the economic lockdown implemented by the state to mitigate the impact of the pandemic by freezing wages and in some cases by imposing temporary wage cuts for some, mostly senior staff. Some planned wage increases have been deferred or reduced, including as a result of decisions by the Fair Work Commission and some government employers. Josh Frydenberg told the Weekend Australian the government will continue to do all that is necessary to create jobs and drive Australia's economic recovery. Okay, here's the thing. The government really shouldn't be creating jobs. It's not their role. Well, I would argue it shouldn't be their role. Some people see it as the government's role. They would love us all to work for the government and all to have, equality and, living in a concrete house and getting our food rations and, forget about money or digital currency. We'll just get, restaurant ration cards, restaurant vouchers. But I'd argue that the main role of government is to enforce the law, to enforce our private property rights, and to get out of the way of the private sector to allow them to create jobs. Sure, there's certain fundamental things that we can get greater efficiencies through collaborating through government, but I'd argue it may have grown a little bit overboard. I think it's always been overboard in Australia. Anyway, the Treasurer said the government was providing unprecedented support to households and businesses, including the $101 billion JobKeeper program, and bringing forward a personal income tax cut in last month's budget. Now, the $101 billion JobKeeper program, what you have to realize, everyone, that's propping up businesses. Now that that's been scaled back, insolvencies are increasing. It's a sad reality. People are being let go. Job seeker is going up. Because honestly, some people have probably kept their business going longer than they should have. Maybe just out of hope that it will the economy will spring back, or to keep their staff on to be able to pay them JobKeeper. Bosses aren't all the evil villains that the cartoons portray. Thanks to our tax relief, millions of low and middle income earners will pay less tax, allowing them to spend more on what matters to them. Yeah, food, and clothing and housing. You've got to remember that. You have to pay your taxes before you provide food for your family and before you put a house over your head. Just remember that, everyone. That's the hope. That's what I hope our politicians and civil servants would appreciate. That they're spending little Johnny's clothing money. They're spending a young couple's savings for a mortgage payment. Every time they do that, every time they spend money, every time they waste. But Labor Treasurer spokesman Jim Chalmers said the government was presiding over the worst wage growth on record even before the pandemic. Yeah, well, Labor's right. You have. Never forget, they said stagnant wages were a deliberate design feature of their economic policy. Without a good enough plan for jobs and the recovery, Australians will snap back to more of the same stagnant wages. Well, what you need to do is let's look at some special economic regions where we remove some of the artificial flaws in the wages. And then we compensate that by having lower taxes in those regions. What do you reckon? You think they'll ever try something like that? Nah, we can't have that. People need to be paid $30 an hour to make a cup of coffee. However, Australian Industry Group Chief Executive Ines Willocks said low wage growth was critical to a recovery in employment. At the same time, we need to ensure that aggregate demand also grows, he said. Well, this is the thing. Having artificial, okay, let's do a little, we'll do a little diagram here. Real simple diagram. This is supply and demand. Where they meet, that's equilibrium. Where you set an artificial wage in place at this level, demand will be really high, but the supply will only be here. So there'll be supply will be really high over here. There's the number of people that want to be supplied, and that's the demand paying at that high rate. So there's a gap. It's called unemployment. There's some people that can't even have the capacity to reach that minimum level. So that's why if we implement these artificial, it's stupid. Think about it. You implement these artificial flaws in the economy to stimulate wages, but then you're pricing out the poorest people who can't work at that capacity, or it discriminates people, the most vulnerable. And then you have a duty of care to those people because you've made it impossible for them or very difficult for them to enter into the workforce. So then you need to tax the people that are working money in order to provide it to the people that can't. You've got a responsibility because you've taken advantage of that price floor. And then, of course, maybe it's all by design, just to create animosity between those that are working and those that can't. So then we don't really focus our attention on the people that are screwing up the whole system, our political leaders, and maybe, those wonderful reserve banks that can just tax us away in an instant by increasing inflation. Maybe I've had my silver hat on, my tinfoil hat on too much. I need some more coffee. What do you think about that one, everyone? Because there's also the iron law of wages. You've got to understand, wages are a significant portion of your cost base. So if your wages goes up, the cost to consumers go up. It's that simple. And that's also why work is getting sent offshore, whatever can. Whatever can. Two reasons. One, you can actually get some pretty good work done offshore. I know people who hire full-time support staff in the Philippines that work completely remotely. Same language, and they're paid quite well when the conversion kicks in, and they appreciate it, and they're very loyal for quite a cheap cost. So we're in a global world now. We're competing with that. I've encountered that in my business. There are other architectural firms much larger than mine, and I'm shocked at the fees they can do work for. It's because they get a lot of the drafting done overseas. It's just the challenge, the environment that we live in. So you've got to understand that. This is more efficiently achieved through tax cuts and government expenditure than by wage increases. Okay. We can only expect to see high levels of wage growth once the economy has stabilized and is growing, as well as seeing real productivity growth. Well, see, this is the thing. They need to freeze our wages as much as they can so it's competitive on an international level, so then businesses and activities will be viable to do here in Australia. That's what needs to happen. There's a reason why manufacturing is falling out of fashion here in Australia. We would go out of our way to specify Australian manufacturers on jobs, but so many of them have just decanted all of their manufacturing facilities overseas. You'd specify locally made products, the client would approve it, then the builder would come with an alternative that's cheaper. Sure, it doesn't have the same warranty or the same conditions. Client doesn't care about that. They just see the dollar sign. Spec'd out, cheap Chinese import brought in. And they're getting better, guys. The quality that you can get from overseas can be quite good. We need to stop being so arrogant to think that our productive or manufacturing capacity could actually even achieve the quality that you can get overseas anymore. How do we even have that skill anymore in our nation? So, we can't wish for wage growth. We have to work for it. Well, yeah, we do. We do. There's one thing what's quite interesting is we might have capacity with steel exporting again because the costs are going up in China. There could be an opportunity there. But then again, what about the red tape? What about the union involvement? And what about the other challenges that would be involved if you're trying to set something like that up? And why would you do it when you can just flip houses, guys? Seriously. Wage cuts and freezes reported by firms via its outreach program have fed the RBA's grim view of income and price growth during the course of the pandemic. According to emails disclosed this week under Freedom of Information laws, why are they doing that? The RBA should just put everything out. There should be nothing secret at the RBA. Officials in August said they feared private sector wage growth is expected to decline materially in coming quarters as an increasing proportion of firms implement wage freezes, cuts or below average wage growth outcomes relating to the previous year. Further reports of deferring pay increases and annual salary reviews have continued, the email said. At the time, according to the RBA's Perth-based economist Paula Gadsby, the liaison survey showed 35% of firms were freezing or cutting wages, up from 10% in 2019, while 36% reported expectations of below average wage rise in the year ahead. See, here's the problem. I can see them not wanting this information to get out because their whole shtick is manipulating us and the economy. So you just got to imagine. Just keep that in mind. How many of we're reading all this stuff leaked or freedom of information requests just to get information from the RBA? And would they say one thing and then do the other? Look at our cash rate, guys. Just keep all that in mind with the exploration of central bank digital currencies, and wonder why a lot of people are terrified about them. The Australian Bureau of Statistics this week reported growth in the wage price index slowed to 0.2% in the June quarter, to be up 1.8% in the year, the slowest growth rate in both measures on record. Well, that's not really surprising. You're lucky to have your job, to be honest. This is the thing here. We're having a two-speed economy right now. It's exacerbated. You've got the ones that have not felt a thing or even profiting from this economic decline, and the others that are suffering through it. According to Commonwealth Bank internal data capturing wages and salaries paid into accounts, the pre-coronavirus annual average growth in total pay was running at 4%. During the pandemic, it had plummeted to about 1%, and CBA economists forecast wage growth across the economy at that rate over 2021. By June, the RBA expects wage growth to trough at around 1% and pick up only gradually to 1.75% by the end of 2022. The RBA said nominal wage setting norms and inflation expectations could become anchored at lower levels than seen before the pandemic. It is also possible that the widespread imposition of wage freezes, combined with a prolonged period of labour market slack, high unemployment, embeds a norm for wage increases that is below 2%, the RBA said. But in the other direction, officials say shortages in skilled labour and supply constraints in some parts of the economy could add more to wage and price pressure than currently expected. The RBA expects unemployment to peak at 8% this quarter. It will be no lower than 6% by the end of 2022. And this was written by Tom Dezovic, the national chief reporter. So what do you think about this one, everyone? I'm more and more concerned with the lack of transparency coming from the RBA. How many articles that we're looking at or reading where it's a freedom of information request or leaked emails, all this. Isn't it meant to be a public organization? Funny that, hey? Anyway, guys, let me know your thoughts and opinions. Are you getting a pay rise? Are you giving your staff a pay rise? Or have you implemented or experiencing a pay freeze? What do you expect to happen in the coming months? I'm seeing more and more contacts that I know are moving on or going somewhere else, or businesses that aren't doing too well at the moment, while others are just going gangbusters. It's crazy. As always, thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you're a fan and want to support the content I create here, there are a few ways you can. You can join us on YouTube or Patreon. You can support us using our affiliate links at Amazon, eBay, Independent Reserve, or Kucoin. You can buy merch from HeiseSays, use Gold Pass from the Perth Mint, or support us via PayPal. Take care, everyone. Have a great day. I'll see you next time.